This happened many years ago in Albuquerque, New Mexico, during the summer. I was around 13 or 14 at the time, and my sister and best friend were 15 and 16. This was one of the scariest moments of my life. Summers in New Mexico are hot and oftentimes pretty boring. Being young teenage girls at the time, we would often find odd things to entertain us, and they were not always the best activities for us to be doing. My neighborhood is one of the nicer ones in Albuquerque, but it's surrounded by the ghetto. This has never been a problem before, and we were raised to be cautious and aware of our surroundings. My mother had no problem letting us go around the neighborhood in the late hours of the night. We had this grand idea one evening around 10 or 11 p.m. to go to the elementary school that was about 5 blocks away from my house and run through the sprinklers. This is an activity that we had done several times before. We didn't feel as if we were at risk. We were clearly wrong. The school is surrounded by houses and is not very well lit after hours, so it was a great spot to take off our clothes so we could run through the sprinklers. Yeah, I know. Very stupid. While we were messing around, we noticed a hooded figure standing at the furthest and darkest corner of the schoolyard. We quickly gathered our clothes and cautiously made our way off the school's property and started walking briskly back toward my house. The path that we had to take took us from a very poorly lit area to pitch darkness. As we crossed into the darkest part of the road, we looked back, and in the last glimpse of light available, we saw the figure running as fast as he could to catch up with us. We booked it to my other friend's house, which was closer than mine. My friend was out of town, but luckily for us, her sister was there, having a party. We ran inside, practically crying. I'm sure she was thrilled a bunch of teenage girls crashed her party. Once we explained what happened, some of the older guys went out to go look for whoever was following us. They found someone hiding in the bushes with a knife. When they confronted him, there was a standoff before he took off running. They offered us a ride home, but we decided just to run the last 5 blocks back to my house. I'm not sure what this man would have done if he had caught us, but it definitely made me more aware of my actions and the possible consequences. I was on a road trip with a group of friends during winter break, driving through the New Mexico desert at night, heading to New Orleans. It was late, probably around midnight, and it was lightly snowing, which is quite unusual for the desert, and visibility was quite low. We were on a remote highway, the kind where you can go miles and miles without seeing another car or even a road sign. The car ride had been pretty upbeat, but the vibe became quite eerie as soon as we turned down this highway. A few years prior, we had gone to see a film called The Hills Have Eyes. For those of you who are unaware, it's a movie about a group of deformed cannibals living in the New Mexico desert. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I will say that film really left an impression on us. We are all from Santa Barbara and are not used to being in the desert. I forget the exact reason why, but we deviated from the interstate and we're now on the back roads. I think it might have been to avoid an accident that was clogging up traffic. Suddenly, one of us spotted something very strange on the side of the road. It appeared to be a figure kneeling just off the pavement. At first, we thought it might have been someone in trouble, but as we slowed down to get a better look, something felt really off. The figure was hardly wearing any clothing, despite it being freezing cold out. Their posture was very rigid, not moving at all, not trying to wave us down, just kneeling there, facing away from us. I thought it might have been someone who was in an accident and may have been in shock or something. So I told my friend to stop the car. She did, and reversed to a spot in the road that was parallel to the crouching man. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked. When the figure turned its head, we were all speechless. The best way I can describe it is that this man's face looked like it had been torn off and healed back over. He had no lips or nose, just a row of crooked teeth and a nasal cavity, giving his face a skull-like appearance. But the most disturbing part were his eyes. I only got a quick look, but it seemed like he had no eyelids. He had these really dried out, bulging spheres that just stared back at us. I don't want to sound insensitive, but seeing this severely deformed man in the middle of the New Mexico desert in the dead of night was extremely horrifying. My friend slammed on the gas and we just drove away. None of us could explain it at the time, but my best guess is that he was a burn victim who was wandering around out there. But part of me thinks we might have seen a ghost who died in a car accident on that highway. Either way, this was hands down one of the most unsettling events I've ever experienced. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I, both females, would spend many days exploring the remote corners of the land of enchantment, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March of 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. We took a back road rather than traveling the more direct route. One leg of our journey had us on NM55. It's a very remote highway that runs through a very large, isolated region of the state. We loved those types of roads up until that day. This part of New Mexico is a flat, desolate area, and there is virtually nothing except sand and rock formations between the towns, which are spread miles apart. So we were going north on the highway when we saw a white pickup truck ahead of us, going in the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to be doing this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than having to stop. We were about a half mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed in the same direction that we were going. We tried to relax. Surely this guy was a rancher or something. Perhaps he was just checking out something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a couple of things. One, there was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged man who never took his eyes off of us. And two, he was speaking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and began following us, but he never got too close. He would get to within about 40 feet, then sped back up again. We were starting to get nervous. I realized just how alone we really were. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones, and neither one of us had signal, which is typical for remote New Mexico, but very scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up while I was frantically checking the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic, but we were out of luck. There were no other roads. We had to travel on this one to get to the next town, Mountain Air. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming toward us. He was going very, very slow, maybe around 20 miles per hour, if that. This truck was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us looked newer. Amy had us up to 75 miles per hour, which wasn't typical for us, and we blew right past the old pickup. As we did, We saw that it was another middle-aged man, and he was also talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white truck passed him, he made a U-turn. As we watched all this unfold, we could see the man in the white pickup say something into his walkie-talkie. There was no doubt they knew each other and were deliberately following us. For the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought that the second truck we saw had set a trap in the road, which would cause our vehicle to be disabled somehow. We talked about driving into the fields. We were in an SUV, but it was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what might happen if we went off-road and got cornered. So we stayed on the highway. The white pickup truck was right on top of us. He stayed right on our bumper. The second truck was directly behind him, and the three of us sped down the highway. The white truck maneuvered and edged closer to us, making it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within inches of our back bumper. Amy floored it, advancing to 80 miles per hour, and soon speeding up to 90. The road was flat and deserted, but if any little thing went wrong, it could have been catastrophic. We absolutely were not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white truck then pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us, and if he accomplished this with the other truck behind us, we would have been boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. But could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed toward a road on the left. Right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up to the blue truck, we saw the plate said U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other before looking back behind us. Both trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue truck to Mountain Air and then made our way to Albuquerque from there. I don't know exactly what those men's intentions were, but they couldn't have been anything good. There was something seriously messed up going on out there. I notified the state police as soon as I got back home, and they said they would keep an eye on things. This area is near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, which is where David Parker Ray had his secret torture laboratory. We didn't put all that together until later, and even though David Parker Ray had died around the same time this happened to us, it is believed that there are others out there just like him. And whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. Perhaps we just came into a meth lab territory. But since this happened on an actual highway rather than some country back road, I tend to discount that theory. Whatever's going on out there, it's not good. This occurred in 2009. I was 22 years old, and I was leaving my home state of California to head east for my corrections job. I was driving down US Route 50 in Nevada, often called the loneliest highway. It was around 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning. They don't call it the loneliest highway for no reason. I hadn't seen another soul for at least half an hour. I was getting sleepy, but I wasn't tired enough to pull over and take a nap. That's when I saw a broken down car on the side of the highway. I slowed down and saw a woman standing next to a car. I approached this woman with caution, rolling down my window just a sliver. Something about her wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it. But I now know it was my subconscious screaming at me for ignoring the red flags. I asked her if she needed me to call a tow truck or AAA, but she immediately tried to open my door. I explained to her that I didn't feel comfortable letting her in, but that I would wait until a tow truck came. she immediately got this look of rage on her face and began berating me. "You're a big guy. What am I going to do to you?" This is where I fucked up. I can see this now all these years later. I begrudgingly unlocked my door, figuring that she was right. She was at most 5'2" and I'm over 6 feet and had at least 100 pounds on her. She looked to be about 90 or so pounds. She slips in. I asked her who I can call. At the time I had one of those BlackBerry slide phones. She starts telling me that she would just prefer if I gave her a ride to the next town. Now I'm starting to realize that I have made a horrible mistake, because she's avoiding eye contact and fumbling around in her purse. When I mentioned calling for help again, she became aggressive, demanding that I just take her to the next town. I was so busy trying to unfuck this situation that I missed a man who was either hiding in or around her car. It wasn't until he was almost to my driver's side door that I managed to catch him in my rearview mirror. Fight or flight kicked in. I put my car in drive and sped off right as the fucker was reaching for my car door. As I raced down the highway, I heard a ping noise and then my rearview mirror exploding. This lunatic was shooting at me. The adrenaline alone had me doing near 90, and by this time, the woman had realized in whatever drug-induced stupor she was in that her little plan had failed. She started hitting me, telling me to stop and let her out. When I reached enough of a distance, I did just that. I pulled over and demanded that she get the fuck out of my car. She began going for the oversized purse she had, but I had enough and was literally shaking with adrenaline as I reached over, opened the door, and pretty much shoved her out. I tried grabbing for her purse in case she was going for some kind of weapon, but she managed to hold on to it, but not before dumping half of what was inside on my passenger seat. I sped off with my door still open and waited until I got a good distance from her before I slammed it shut and locked it. I clenched the wheel and drove as if I was on autopilot. It wasn't until later that morning that I pulled into a Denny's that it finally dawned on me how close I was to pretty much dying. It was only then that I saw the things that she had spilled onto my passenger seat. Most of it was nasty watered up napkins, a few tubes of lipstick, and drug paraphernalia. I had considered calling the cops or finding a highway patrol, but I tossed all of her things into a trash bag and threw them away. At the time, I dreamed of becoming a cop, and I knew if I got caught with this drug paraphernalia, that would have been impossible. I didn't think they would believe it wasn't mine. I then noticed a police car at the gas station across from the Denny's, and I ended up telling him what happened. He pretty much berated me for pulling over and allowing her to get in. But he did say that he would look into it, but I doubt he did. I never did replace that mirror because I ended up selling that car, as where I live now didn't require me to have one. To this day, I hesitate to stop and help stranded motorists, especially out on those desert roads. It's more than likely a trap. I'm a female, and this happened over 25 years ago, when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mom and stepfather in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone to visit with my friends, being allowed to drive myself for the first time ever. I had a good time watching movies and hanging out with my friends until it was time to head back home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m., with the caveat that if I was running late for any reason, I would have to find a payphone and call. So there I was, on my way back home in my old 71 Chevy pickup truck, with the night wrapped around me, as there were no street lights or houses for most of my way home. As I pulled up to the first two stop signs, I could see an old sedan. Older model cars are still pretty common in that area. It was stopped in the middle of the road with its hazard lights on. I pulled up behind it and waited, as a man in his 30s or 40s started walking toward me from the driver's side. At this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing assistance to stranded people was pretty common. you can quickly get yourself into a severe situation by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down or not realizing it's a fucking desert and people die wandering deliriously away from the highway trying to find help. Anyways, I rolled down my window. As the man came up to my driver's side door, I could smell liquor on him. I could see that there was someone else in the passenger seat. This was a time before cell phones were common, and the nearest payphone was a good 10-minute drive away, so there was no way for me to call the cops on a drunk driver in that moment. The man explained that his car stalled and asked if I could help him out. I then asked if his car was stick shift, which it was. "Do you want to try and push start it?" He said yes, so I agreed to gently push their car with my truck while they turned the engine over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that is having battery or starter issues, just to get it to somewhere to work on it. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it was wise to get out and try to push their car physically. Push starting the sedan worked without a hitch, but here's where things go south. They get back out and thank me. They then invite me to come hang out and have some fun with them. I politely decline. They pull off to the side of the road, and I continue on my way. However, they start following me. At this point, it was around 9:50, and I was now running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I hadn't given myself much leeway from leaving my friends. These drunk, creepy older guys were now on my tail, without any lights around except for our vehicle's headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes away from the nearest payphone. I think to myself, maybe I'm just being paranoid, so I turned down a road that I knew would give me a couple of turnoffs to either head back to town or loop around to a gas station that had a payphone. The car follows behind. I'm now thinking, shit, and take another turn that only leads to a couple of houses at the end of a road, and they turn behind me. I then take another turn to loop back around to the gas station, and they stay on me. So at least now I know they are following me and not just heading home. At this point, my heart is pounding. I decided to try something to lose them. I pull off to the side of the road, and I see them come up behind me. I wait till the driver gets out of his car and begins walking towards me. His companion also got out and approached my truck from the other side. I then waited until they almost get to my tailgate before flooring it. My wheels dig into the rocks, causing a cloud of sand to jump up behind me. With a head start, I head towards the gas station. This particular gas station is deserted, but there was still a working payphone by the pumps. I call home and explain what happened and why I was running late. I wasn't in any trouble, but my stepdad told me to hurry back home. There was no further incidents the rest of the way back. Looking back now, I think those two drunk idiots wanted to have their way with 16-year-old me on my first night driving alone. I want to apologize that some of the parts of the story are a bit fuzzy for me because this happened many years ago. Also, this will sound like a bunch of teenage drama at first, but I promise you, by the time this story is done, you will be shocked at how things unfolded. I met Jamie in middle school, and the two of us hit it off right away. We both had similar interests, and I enjoyed her fiery personality a lot. About a year after we met, she moved from the East Coast to Las Vegas, Nevada, but we still stayed in touch, talking almost every day after school or during the summer. We were extremely close and shared almost everything with each other, including secrets we told to no one else. In short, we knew each other well. When we entered high school, our dating lives were no exception to this. We shared who we had a crush on and would console each other whenever one of us had a breakup. We even entertained the idea of dating each other, because of how well we got along, but decided the long-distance thing just wouldn't work out. One day, out of the blue, she mentioned a guy named Ryan. Jamie went to school with him. He was quiet, shy, calm, but very smart. She mentioned to me that they were dating, and I was a bit confused. She had never spoken about him before, and she procrastinated a bit when I asked her for details. But the general gist was that he had had a crush on her for a long time, and finally worked up the courage to ask her out. She accepted, and I didn't think anything of it. After that, I was slowly introduced to Ryan. At first, he was added to our IM chats, which we used whenever it was too late to be on the phone, or when the batteries on our cell phones died. He didn't really talk much, but he seemed okay whenever he did. He started to pop up more often, and I grew to generally like him. We would all sometimes three-way call each other, and he was added to a Google document of ours as an editor, where we would work on collaborative fiction. It was the summer of 2009, I think, and I saved up some money to visit Jamie in Las Vegas. It was an incredible trip, and I still remember it to this day. At the time, Jamie and Ryan were taking a break from their relationship, but I still met him one day, and he seemed pretty normal to me. He was tall, about 2 years older than us. He had dark hair, dark eyes, tan skin. We spoke briefly, and I don't really remember what about. When I returned from Vegas, my contact with Jamie waned a bit. I figured it was because of us going back to school and starting to prep for college and different programs. Phone calls became less frequent. She stopped logging into her chat and kind of just went silent. I was occupied with my own activities, and I didn't want to press her while she was busy. Next spring, she called me late one night. Something had happened, something involving Ryan. She was crying and panicking and apologizing profusely. I couldn't understand her, and it took almost an hour for her to calm down. Eventually, after she stopped sobbing, she laid out everything to me from the beginning. About a year prior to this, she had started dating Ryan. He just randomly approached her one day at school and said that they were dating, despite them never having spoken before. He seemed like a really nice guy, and she figured it was his way of getting over being shy and asking her out, so she accepted. She also figured that he had had a crush on her for a while because of how much he seemed to know about her, despite having different circles of friends and no contact. Slowly, he became more and more controlling, especially when it came to her contact with other people. He demanded to go with her whenever she went out with friends, even if he hadn't been invited. He would cut in and become a part of every conversation she had at school. He declared that they had to meet in the hall between every class, even if that meant she had to run across the school to avoid being tardy. As Ryan became more involved in her life, he began to zero in on her interactions with me. He asked to be added to our chat sessions. He knew we were close and had thought about dating before. He wanted to know what we were writing together. That's why she added him to our Google Doc. And though she kept it a secret how much me and her talked on the phone, he requested to be added each time we did. Their break was really because she had told him that I was coming to visit. He had asked her to tell me to stay home, despite having planned this trip for months, but she refused. I ended up meeting him while I was there on accident, and she was legitimately scared that he might have done something to me. After I went back home, he apologized and tried to make it up to her. It was textbook abuse with the cyclic nature of their relationship. He would mistreat her, then love bomb her, until she took him back. He eventually started pressuring her to cut ties with me again, and started lying about hurtful things I had said about him or her. She didn't believe any of it, but he wore her down with persistence. He would constantly check her phone and computer to see if she had reached out to me. Things got to a point where she snapped and said that she was going to call me, and tell me everything that was going on, and that she was going to leave and move in with family who still lived on the East Coast. He responded by shoving her to the floor and almost breaking her arm. He then stormed out when she cried, but she didn't follow through with her threat. He called the next day and apologized, saying that he would allow her to call me on Sunday and would make up for everything he did by taking her hiking on Red Rock Canyon on Saturday. She cautiously accepted and went about the rest of her week. It was Friday night, around 8 p.m. Jamie gets a knock on the door. It's the police, and they wanted to speak to her and her mom. They came in and proceeded to tell her that they had gotten a tip from one of Ryan's friends that he was planning on murdering Jamie. They got a warrant and searched his room and car. They found a detailed suicide note about his plans to drive Jamie out to the Nevada desert, kill her, and then take his own life, so they could be together forever. They found several knives in his car. After the cops left, she called me right away and spilled everything, and apologized for keeping this all from me. She felt like she could handle this all on her own and didn't want me to be involved. We ended up staying on the phone all night until the two of us fell asleep. We started talking on a regular basis again after that, but I've sadly fallen out of contact with her since. I still check up on her Facebook from time to time. She's moved back to the East Coast and appears to be living a happy life. As for Ryan, I believe that he was committed to a mental health facility and is still there to this day. I'm not sure what charges were brought against him exactly, but he was declared mentally unfit for trial, and Jamie still has a restraining order against him. It just freaks me out that something like this could happen to someone I was close with. I spoke to this guy, met him in person, and yet he was likely already planning to kill my best friend at that point. I still get shivers when I think about him. The police never revealed who tipped them off, but I'm grateful that they did, because I can't even imagine how things would have turned out if they hadn't. Back in the early 90s, when I was 19, my brother and his wife were newlyweds and living in Baltimore. I'm from Maryland myself, but I had not spent any time in the city at that point. I knew it wasn't entirely safe in certain areas, but I was just going straight to my brother's house, so it would be fine, right? Well, I ended up turning onto the wrong street, MLK Boulevard. And back then it was just a stretch of abandoned gas stations, sketchy bars, and boarded up houses. There were a few men walking in the middle of the street, drinking out of brown paper bags. I knew that I had messed up big time, but instead of freaking out and getting even more lost, I pulled into an abandoned gas station where there was a bank of payphones and parked about 10 feet from them, then hopped out to call my brother. Remember, this was about 30 years ago. No cell phones in those days. He was impatient at first because my brother knew the city quite well, but this was my first time driving in it, and I was trying to write down his directions as he gave them to me. Just then, I looked over at my car, and the three men who were walking down the street were now leaning against it. Two on the passenger side, and one against my driver's side door. They were staring at me with their arms crossed. I began to silently cry, thankful that I had on sunglasses at the time. My brother heard me sniffling and said, "Why do you sound so upset? I'm just giving you directions." I couldn't tell him what was going on, as the men were within earshot. I wrote down the rest of the directions, put them in my pocket, and began walking back toward my car. The man leaning against my door reached up and wiped the tears from one cheek. Then he said, "Why are you crying, hon? Nothing bad has happened yet." Without hesitation, I responded, "I just shot my boyfriend. The cops are..." That was all I got out. The three men had taken off in separate directions at full sprint. If I hadn't been gifted that lie from my guardian angels or whoever, who knows what could have happened to me that day. I grew up in a nice neighborhood in Maryland about 15 minutes from the border to Washington, D.C. We never had any serious crimes in our area, just the typical petty theft from people leaving their car doors unlocked. It was a chilly, gloomy Saturday in October of 1993. I was 8 years old back then. My brother James was 12. We had just left his friend's house after playing street hockey in his driveway, and we had to get back home around 5:30. His house is a couple of blocks away from the elementary school, and across the street from there is a pretty big-sized park. Along that road, there's a fence that extends from the park's entrance to a cul-de-sac, where we lived. My brother and I approached a nearby four-way stop and noticed a white 1990 Toyota Camry sitting there. We didn't think anything of it and continued down the sidewalk toward the school. I was talking to him about the Washington Redskins and how we could ride in to get an autograph from Art Monk. He's a famous football player. I noticed that James was oddly quiet during my rambling. I asked him if he was listening, and he responded, "Keep talking, act normal, and don't look back, okay?" Confused and nervous, I responded, "Okay, what's going on?" My brother had been paying attention to the Camry ever since we saw it. It was now driving slowly behind us. We played it cool and kept walking our normal pace. As we were approaching the school, my brother put his hand on my chest, which made me stop immediately. He turned back and glanced at the driver. Now, I wasn't sure if he was trying to see how the driver would react if we wanted to make a move across the street to the park, or if he was trying to see a license plate. However, when we stopped, the car stopped. This time I got a good look. The driver was a female with brunette hair. She looked almost drugged out. She never blinked. She just stared straight ahead. Not at us, not to the side, directly straight. The passenger was the intimidating one. He was a redhead, long hair, and he had this angry look in his eyes. To be honest, he kind of looked like an evil Carrot Top. After getting a good look and realizing the situation we were in, I began to get nervous. My breathing slowed, my legs went numb, and I looked at my brother, and he just said, "Keep walking." What was weird about that day was that there weren't any cars on the road. It felt like a ghost town. It was just us and them. We continued walking toward the next block, when suddenly, the Camry started merging into the other lane. They were attempting to block us off, and then, who knows what. My brother, being the older one, looked around before saying, "On the count of 3, follow me and run as fast as you can." Before I could even say anything, he started his countdown. 3, 2, 1. We took off running, my brother charging ahead, and me trying to keep up. The Camry accelerates. James is able to make it across the street, but the car almost hits me, missing by inches. The Camry turns around and comes after us again. My brother sprints across towards the cul-de-sac, and I followed the best I could. I then realized he was making a run for our friend's house, who lived on this block. Once we got to his doorstep, we immediately started ringing the doorbell and banging on the front door like crazy. The Camry pulls up, and the passenger emerges from the car. As soon as he did, my friend's dad opens the door. We then rush inside. Carrot Top hops back in the Camry, and they speed off. My friend's dad runs out toward the car as it took off, yelling something as he tried to get a license plate. My brother and I were pretty shaken up, and even though we lived only a block away, we called our dad to come pick us up. We contacted the police and filed a report, and they said they would keep their eyes open. The following Monday, we notified the elementary school about the ordeal. However, they didn't do much to let the public know at first. It wasn't until a week later they sent out a flyer to the rest of the parents, and the cops began patrolling the neighborhood more often. During that same week, 3 other cases were reported involving a white Camry, following kids around and trying to kidnap them. There was one I heard that was even more terrifying than our experience, where the kids were jumping through backyards because Carrot Top was chasing after them. After that week, everything eventually calmed down. No arrests were ever made. I don't know if they moved on to another town and tried the same thing there. All I know is that they had our neighborhood terrified for an entire year, and it took a while for things to seem normal again. I live in the mountains of western Maryland. A few months ago, I was out hiking with a friend. We were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop we had done several times before. We decided to stop and take some pictures at the trail summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches, tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and chatting after taking a few snapshots when I noticed a man just walking around the parking lot by himself. He seemed to be wandering aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me was the man was wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, not exactly hiking attire. We eventually set off on the last 2-mile leg of the trail. This part goes downhill to the headquarters of the park and into the mountainside. At the end is a second parking lot, where our car was. You don't have a whole lot of visibility from the trail, and you have to walk in single file because of how narrow it is. I was walking in front and talking to my friend who was behind me. I turned to look at her, and I see the same man from before behind her, following at a close distance. I immediately got this gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have a backpack on or hiking gear and wasn't even wearing boots. There was something about the look in his eyes that really spooked me. So after a bit more walking, he continues to follow very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe as a reason to step off the trail and let him pass, just in case he was only following closely because he wanted to go faster than us. She seemed to catch on to what I was doing, and we step off the trail. He looks startled when my friend politely says hello. He just stared at us. This was when I noticed that he was carrying a stick. Then, without saying a word, he passes us. We wait for him to get some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slows down. We wait a bit longer until he gets to the furthest part of the trail that is still within our sight, and he turns around and looks up at us. We decided that something feels too off about this guy, and we didn't want to have to pass him again. So we turn around and walk back up the trail toward the park. After a few minutes of backtracking, I look behind us and see him walking up the trail as well. I tell my friend to go a little faster. We book it and got back to the first parking area, and then began to strategize and wait, deciding that we should remain here to see if he emerges again. There were more people around here, so we felt safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by, and nothing. We started talking about how this could have meant that he kept going on the trail and is now long gone, or is waiting in a more deserted area to possibly ambush us. We then see an older couple coming from the trail in that direction. We approached them and asked if they saw anyone on their way up. They told us that they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They described the man who had been following us. We explained our interaction with him, and get into a back and forth conversation on whether or not he was a threat. That's when the husband finally interjects and says, "We should call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and seemed to be sharpening that stick he was holding." The wife was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but we ended up calling a ranger after hearing that. The nice couple escorted us back to our car to make sure we got there safely. The rangers contacted us later on. They walked the trail, but by then, the man was long gone. I wish I knew where he went off to, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legit when it comes to sensing danger. I've been a fan of your channel for some time now. I've noticed that you've done some first-hand accounts of murders that have taken place in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think every family has a story where they were a small part of some very unfortunate history. When you announced that you were doing a video on Maryland, I had to call up my Uncle Roger. This is his story, and I'll be writing it from his perspective as he told it to me. March 29th, 1982, is a day that I'll never forget. I grew up in Columbia, Maryland. Columbia was known as a quiet, safe town where middle-class families lived and commuted to work in Baltimore, which is about 30 minutes from there. I was 17 at the time, and I used to ride my bike down one of the narrow pathways to the village center. That day I was just going to grab a pop from one of the shops there, and then maybe waste a few quarters at the local arcade afterward. Mom was working late at the hospital that day, so I had some time to kill. I was about halfway down the path when I saw a woman walking ahead of me. She was maybe in her late 20s, wearing a light jacket and jeans, with her hair pulled back into a ponytail. I didn't think much of it at first. People are always walking to the village center. But I remember specifically she was singing a tune to herself. It was soft, but clear, like she didn't care who heard. And I knew the song, "Ain't No Mountain High Enough." They played it on the radio all the time. Not wanting to startle her by flying past on my bike, I slowed down. She must have heard the squeak of my brakes, because she glanced back at me when I stopped. Our eyes met for a second, and I felt a little embarrassed. She had this tired look in her eyes, but her smile was warm. Sorry," I said. "It's okay, kid. Let me get out of your way." I gave a dumb nod, the kind you do when you're an awkward teenager who doesn't know how to communicate with adults. She waved me on. I pedaled past and made my way toward the village center. The rest of that day was uneventful for me. This encounter may not sound like anything special, but it turns out I was one of the last people to see that woman alive. Her name was Lainey Lee McGadney. She got into a car at some point after I passed her on the path, a brown Ford LTD, but no one could provide an accurate description of whoever was driving that car. Her body was later discovered on a vacant lot nearby. She had been raped and murdered. Despite police efforts, the case remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades. It left a lasting impact on the community due to the brutal nature of the killing. Columbia's reputation as a safe town also died that day. In 2021, a breakthrough in DNA evidence linked a man named Howard Jackson Bradbury Jr. to the crime. This development provided some closure, but questions still remain about the exact circumstances, potential accomplices, or why McGadney was targeted. This murder is still considered a significant unsolved tragedy in Maryland's history. Growing up in Maryland, I've had my fair share of weird and creepy encounters. This particular incident has left me truly horrified. Even now, when I think about it, I can't help but to feel uneasy. It was back in September of last year. These events took place, ironically, on Friday the 13th. My boyfriend Zach was visiting when this happened. At first, everything was going great. and all seemed normal. But when Friday came around, that's when things went south. Zach and I decided to go to the local mall to see the new Beetlejuice movie, and I was wearing a black and white dress with flat black slippers. We took a lift to get there, and nothing seemed weird at first. But when we walked inside the mall, that's when I saw this man. He looked like he was in his 50s or 60s, overweight, and had gray hair. He also wore a thick pair of glasses with a blue shirt on and shorts. He was staring at us, and not trying to hide it either. Then we went to go grab some food at a Chinese restaurant in the mall. Once we sat down, I noticed that the man had followed us there. At first, I was willing to dismiss him as just some gawking creep, but then I started to get uncomfortable. We still had some time to kill, so we stopped by the bookstore. After browsing around, we walked out, and I saw the man again, shadowing us. I would have mentioned something to Zach, but I suddenly had to use the restroom bad. It was at that point I was regretting the Chinese. Zach waited outside the restrooms, so I didn't worry about the man following me in there. But there was something about this guy that really unnerved me. I didn't know if he was waiting for Zach to leave me by myself before he made some kind of move. When I walked out, my stalker was nowhere in sight, and I was relieved. Zach and I went to go see the movie, and I tried to put this in the back of my mind. By the time the end credits were rolling, I had almost forgotten about the creep in the glasses. That was until, when we got up to leave, I saw him, sitting a few rows behind us. He was staring directly at me, again. I was so freaked out that I ran out of the theater and into the lobby to call my mom. I told her what was going on, and she said to go get security. But the only problem was that the mall was now dead, and I didn't see any guards in sight. I lost sight of the man in the exiting crowd. We eventually took a lift back to my house. On the way home, I noticed a blue car following us, and I had a feeling I knew who was behind the wheel. It finally turned down another street about 10 minutes or so from where I live. Ever since that night, from time to time, I swear I see that same blue car parked in the street outside my house. Perhaps I'm just being paranoid, but whenever I go out with friends or to run some errands in town, I feel that someone is watching me. I'm sharing this story as a warning to please pay attention to your surroundings, even if you're on a date or with people you trust. You never know who's watching. There's
always a reason to be afraid.